Hello class, this is Pei Zhang. We'll be going over the remainder of the common medical genres that mostly are medical. The first genre we will tackle is the clinical guidelines, or CGs. Although much biomedical research is carried out to improve clinical practice, not all of it is equally relevant. Besides, clinicians simply don't have access to all documents, nor the time to read the huge amounts of research literature that are generated and published every week in order to extract the knowledge needed to improve their own clinical practice. Thus, clinical guidelines are meant to transfer relevant biomedical research to the clinic. Clinical guidelines, also known as clinical practice guidelines or practice guidelines, are systematically developed statements to assist practitioner and patient decisions about appropriate healthcare for specific clinical circumstances. They offer concise instruction on clinical practice and can be developed at a national or local level by multidisciplinary groups. CGs are documents written by teams of experts for experts and are usually developed by multidisciplinary groups of researchers and addressed to practitioners. Their main purpose is to make explicit recommendations designed to influence what clinicians do. In addition, CGs are used to standardize and raise the quality of medical care and to reduce several kinds of risks to the patient, to the healthcare provider, to medical insurers, and health plans. Depending on the methodology used for developing them, several types of CGs can be distinguished: expert opinion-based guidelines, consensus-based guidelines, and evidence-based guidelines. The latter are based on a thorough evaluation of evidence and are defined as the way a procedure is done or a condition is managed. They have been developed in the context of evidence-based medicine and evidence-based healthcare. Evidence-based medicine is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. The practice of evidence-based medicine and healthcare requires the integration of individual clinical expertise with the best available external clinical evidence from systematic research. Although the writing of CGs is not regulated by strict norms, there are several legal instruments, both at national and supranational levels. For instance, recommendations adopted by the Committee of Ministers of European Council is one of those. There are other standardization bodies with a wider reach. The Guidelines International Network is an international non-profit-making association. There's also an international project of appraising clinical guidelines, the AGREE collaboration. This project has developed an appraisal instrument to assess clinical guidelines and to harmonize guideline development. The purpose of the Appraisal of Guidelines Research and Evaluation Instrument is to provide a framework for assessing the quality of clinical guidelines. Clinical Trial Protocol, or CTP. Let's have a look at the following real communicative situation. Many women of a certain age who, among other things, have a family history of breast cancer, or who have had a number of breast biopsies, are thought to be at increased risk of developing the disease. The Clinical Trial Group, or CTG, of the National Cancer Institute of Canada is promoting a study of a new drug in Canada, the US, and Spain to determine whether and to what extent it reduces the incidence of breast cancer in such women. This type of investigation is called a clinical trial and requires a document, a clinical trial protocol, in which all relevant aspects of the investigation are reflected and properly stored for further communicative uses, such as requesting marketing authorization. Those clinical trials, also called clinical studies, are experiments performed on human subjects in order to describe the pharmacological and pharmacodynamic effects of the products, any adverse reaction, as well as any matters related to their safety and efficacy. A clinical trial protocol is a document that describes the objective, purpose, and design of the trial, the selection and treatment of subjects, statistical considerations, and other issues related to the methodology and organization of the study. It can be written by a chief researcher in the case of multi-center trials, when trials are carried out in more than one center, as in the example above, or by a principal researcher for single-center trials. A CTP must be submitted to the appropriate authorities when requesting authorization for a clinical trial of a medicinal product for human use. It is attached to the application form along with the researcher's brochure and other medically related research data, such as the medicinal research product dossier. Individual states may also have additional regulations. There are some documents relating to particular directives. In the case in Spain, for instance, the terminology and abbreviations must be consistent with ICH, and terms have to be used accurately. The review article, or RA. Biomedical research generates a wealth of information every week. Researchers, physicians, general practitioners, and other health professionals, as well as undergraduate and postgraduate students, constantly need to update their knowledge for different purposes: carrying out further research, improving clinical practice, developing new drugs, acquiring professional knowledge and skills, and so forth. Review articles provide them with rigorous overview of the most relevant research in a particular area, so that they do not have to access, collect, select, read, and analyze the primary sources of biomedical research information, which mainly are the original articles. Thus, the RA is a synoptic paper whose purpose is twofold. It spares clinicians the burden of searching and sifting the literature for reliable guidance in practice, and it tells investigators where their research field stands on their particular problem and may suggest what directions new research should take. Authors of RAs are experts at the cutting edge in their particular field. Their role as reviewers is that of a teacher who guides students through a sea of information. Traditionally, reviews have relied mainly on the individual knowledge of the reviewer as an authority in a particular field, and have been written from a personal point of view. However, in areas in which there is a wealth of valuable information, and with the advent of evidence-based medicine, reviews have become far less ex cathedra and far more systematic and objective. A meta-analysis is a type of systematic review in which data from separate studies that address a similar research question are combined qualitatively and then analyzed statistically. Although there's no fixed structure for review articles, most of them contain the following sections: Introduction, in which the reviewer explains the question addressed; Methods, that is, a statement of how data were selected; Body of the review, that is, the presentation of data; and lastly, the conclusion, in which the initial question is answered. Standard Operating Procedure, or SOP. Every effective quality system is based on standard operating procedures. SOPs are written descriptions and instructions used in many professional practices to ensure the quality of products and processes and comply with the current regulations and require consistency or uniformity in the performance of specific functions. They normally describe routine or repetitive tasks carried out by an organization, like a pharmaceutical laboratory or a hospital, as well as procedures to be followed when responding to abnormal situations. The presence of these quality documents is essential when inspections take place, since the most frequently reported deficiencies during inspections are the lack of written SOPs and/or the failure to adhere to them. SOPs usually belong to a work plan or to a quality assurance project plan. They are written by experts who have a deep knowledge of the activities performed in the organization and of the organization's internal structure. These documents are addressed to the appropriate authorities, as well as to all those involved in the procedures described, providing them with the information they need to perform a task properly and improve consistency in the quality of products and outcomes. They can also be used to train new personnel. Thus, they are highly specialized formal texts. Standard operating procedures are regularly reviewed and updated to ensure that they encourage efficient working practices that comply with the ever-increasing government regulatory framework that we have to operate within. SOPs should be easy to read, expressed simply and concisely, and the information provided should be unambiguous, explicit, and not excessively complex. Terminology must be consistent with that used and recognized by those involved in the organization. SOPs are usually divided into short sections and subsections and sometimes contain diagrams, flowcharts, and bullet points for ease of reading. Unlike SPCs, SOPs do not have one single template. The structure varies with each organization and with the type of procedures described. However, SOPs often include a title page, a table of contents, description of the procedure, and documents that are usually attached. SOPs are necessary for clinical research organizations. Some of the aspects that SOPs cover include protocol preparation, ethical approval, assessing and monitoring trial sites, safety data reporting, checking data integrity, clinical report writing, database preparation, and validation of computer systems. Common problems when translating SOPs include references to the culture of the source text, such as allusions to the country where the text has been written and to its regulation, to the name of a certain medicine, trade name, international non-proprietary name, etc. Moreover, source texts are not as unequivocal and explicit as they should be, so translators sometimes have to struggle to produce a good target text. If the wording of any item of information is open to several interpretations, the translator must contact the organization or SOP writer in order to make the meaning absolutely clear. Nothing must be left to the reader's imagination. Drug advertisement, or DA. Health is one of the most important issues in society, and the pharmaceutical industry, one of the most powerful economic sectors worldwide, makes money out of health, or the lack of it. After a new drug has been developed in the laboratory, tested in animals and humans, and approved by the appropriate authorities, pharmaceutical laboratories try to sell as much of it as they can. Marketing in its different forms is the tool laboratories use, like any other company in any other economic sector, to achieve their goals. And advertising, in particular, is one of the most important marketing strategies used by them to sell their products. If you read how someone suffers from a particular condition, you will probably want to know what treatments are available and where. Some drugs can be bought at the chemist's over the counter, while others can only be obtained with a doctor's prescription. Owing to possible drug-related health risks, the pharmaceutical industry is heavily regulated, not only as far as development and experimentation is concerned, but also in relation to the advertising and promotion of its products. For instance, in the United States, the FDA regulates all advertising and promotional activities for prescription drugs. Over-the-counter drugs, on the other hand, can be advertised in the mass media, like internet, television, radio, newspapers, magazines, and so forth, to the general public. However, their potential target recipient includes not only the consumers themselves, that is, the patients, but also physicians, pharmacists, and other health professionals who may be in a position to recommend such drugs to patients. Advertising prescription drugs to the general public is banned in Europe. Therefore, medical practitioners become sort of a bridge in the advertising process between the seller, the pharmaceutical laboratory, and the consumer, the patient in those countries where only over-the-counter drugs can be advertised in mass media. So, how are prescription drugs advertised to medical practitioners? Firstly, by means of advertisements placed in medical journals, on pharmaceutical companies' websites, or other specialized biomedical websites which allow advertisement. Secondly, by pharmaceutical sales representatives who, in addition to oral explanations and presentations, provide practitioners with brochures, clinical guidelines, leaflets information for patients, and samples of the product. Most pharmaceutical companies advertise medicinal products on their website, so you can look for them and you can find examples of texts belonging to this genre.